No one repeats anymore. Auburn just won the conference tournament. They got Broome. They're doing it again. Auburn taking down UConn. Illinois. Okay, Auburn's coming out of the East. Final Four, no doubt. Let's go. All right, man, one shot. Let's go. Down to 6 seconds. Got a miss. Good miss. Good rebound. Broome. No. Ah, blocked again. Pull it out. 3 for the win. 3 for the win. No! Well, I guess my bracket's done already. There's been a lot of talk about expansion of the NCAA tournament recently, so we're going to look at it today. So, should the NCAA tournament expand at all? And if so, to how many teams? So we will go through the media rights, the NCAAs, the players, the teams, the conferences, and the fans' perspectives to get us all to the grand conclusion of what the best tournament would look like. And that'll be today's show. Welcome to the SportsZu. Zoo Crew. So as you know, the NCAA tournament is perfect as it is, but could it be better? But first, here's what Coach K had to say to ESPN in an article that came out just before the tournament. You don't change something now not knowing, is there going to be an NCAA? If there will be an NCAA, what will it be? Before you start messing around with a tournament, understand what it is. It's a treasure. It's not something where you flippantly say, let's go to 96 teams. Everyone, just keep quiet and recognize the treasure we have. The NCAA tournament, very briefly, its history. It started out in 1939 with a mere 8 teams in it. And in fact, at that time, the NIT was the most prestigious tournament in the country for NCAA basketball. Now that slowly changed as the tournament expanded. It went to 16 teams in 1951, then doubled to 32 teams in 75, and doubled again to 64 in 1985. But then, since 1985, we've had a long time where it's barely changed at all. We added the first play-in game in 2001 to get us to 65 teams in the tournament. And then in 2011, the first 4 was born. And we have our current format with 68 teams. So you can see the tournament bracket right there. Isn't it a thing of beauty? I really think that's one of the keys to the NCAA tournament, the bracket. It's simple, it's straightforward, it fits on one page. So yes, you can see the first 4 are lined up along the top. This year, they happen to be 10 seeds, but more often than not, those are 11 or 12 seeds. Then, of course, we have the 2 16-seed games as well for the 4 lowest-seeded automatic qualifiers. But as you can see, we have 4 regions with seeds 1 through 16, and those first 4 teams have to win 1 game to get into the first round of 64 teams. And we go on from there. 2 games in each site for the first and second round. Then they go to a second site for the Sweet 16 and the Elite 8. Then we get the Final 4, where we have 1 venue this year. As you can see, it is in Phoenix, Arizona. And that will be held on April 6th for the semifinals, and the championship game will be on April 9th. So let's first start with the media rights contract between the NCAA and CBS and Warner Brothers Discovery, previously known as Turner Sports. Now, in 2010, the NCAA signed a 14-year deal with these 2 entities worth $10.8 billion. But 6 years after that original contract, the 2 parties signed an extension for 8 years for $8.8 billion. That runs through 2032. So coincidentally enough, the original contract would end after this season in 2024. So the new terms will kick in for the 2024-2025 basketball season. So, On3 had a nice article recently where one veteran TV source who has been involved in several marquee rights agreements told On3 that adding 22 games would amount to only marginal additional value for the property. And the 22 games, why they picked that number, we'll come back to it in a little bit. But it is a number worth noting. So that will give us 90 total teams in the tournament. So with the NCAA locked into its deal through 2032, interviews with nearly a dozen industry leaders suggest that expansion in the next few years wouldn't necessarily translate into a financial boon. So, while the contract between these two parties are private, the broadcast partners have exclusive rights to the tournament or any expansion of it in 2032. Most notably, the NCAA could not give, NBC or ESPN a few additional beyond the 67 games that are currently in the tournament. So, CBS and Turner are not believed to be under any obligation to open up the deal to financial adjustments if the tournament expands. That is the most important thing of anything we're going to talk about today. The Warner Brothers Discovery and CBS do not have to change the deal if the NCAA wants to add teams. So they could be locked into the $8.8 billion no matter what. If that were the case, they could add a whole other round and get to 128 teams, and it would be free, essentially, for the TV partners. They would just have to show up with their cameras, hit play, and they'd be good to go. They'd take all the profit, and CBS and Warner Bros. Would be laughing all the way to the bank. NCAA, on the other hand, wouldn't see another dime, other than whatever they get out of, holding the event at the venue. So we need to make that our number one point. Again, they are under no obligation to adjust the financial terms. Yes, the two networks have to show the games, but they do not have to adjust the financial terms. So Navigate, I'm not familiar with them at all, but they specialize in college and pro sports rights valuations. Now, they told On3 in the same article that their data indicated that if they added the 22 games, it would be a significant benefit if the deal were reworked. So let's assume, as they did in the article, that the NCAA's annual rights were $1 billion. It will soon reach that number. So it makes sense as each year the annual payment goes up. So if expansion enabled the NCAA to open up its rights deal with CBS and Turner, and if the new adjusted deal were to reset to today's market rates for TV, the 67 current games would be worth around a 50% increase above the $1 billion that we generically just set the number at. So 67 games, if they're worth $1 billion right now, they would then immediately be worth $1.5 billion if you open up the contracts. There alone, why would the two networks want to do that? So from there, Navigated indicated if you added the 22 games that we keep talking about, it would increase the amount of the inventory by 33%, which increases the total value to $2 billion per year. So, we go from $1 billion right now to $2 billion if we add the 22 games. So you can see the quote from Navigate's Senior Vice President, Mark Balvans. If it is reset to market values with the expectations that the additional games have similar TV viewership as the rest of the tournament, quite a big assumption there, we'll get to that shortly, then the value essentially doubles from $1 billion per year to $2 billion per year. But there is no guarantee CBS Turner would reopen the deal, which we keep talking about. They shouldn't do that. So let's look at it by the TV. Generically, when we're including in the entire year of 2023, the most watched networks by total viewers, you can see it's looking bad for everyone. On the far right, I have a negative number. For each of these 5 listings, I put NBC, they're number 1, they averaged over 4.5 million viewers in the primetime spots, but that was down 12% from the year before. CBS, who does show the tournament, still managed over 5.5 million themselves, but they also dropped 12%. The other 3 networks you can see, varied in how much they dropped as well, but all 3 dropped from -3% to -18%. Now, as some would say, a better indicator is the adult 18 to 49 market. So when we look at that, Fox jumps over NBC, and they had 994,000 in that demographic, and that actually went up 10% from the previous year, probably because they had more live sports than the previous year. But CBS is 4th in that demographic. They got hammered and dropped 17%. TNT slightly went up with a +1%, but TBS and truTV both had rough years at -16 and 24% respectively. So you say, sure, okay, so let's get more live sports on. That's going to help us. To focus on the first 4 in the first round. So let's look at this year's viewership numbers from the first 4. So we had Wagner and Howard as the first game on Tuesday, and then Colorado State, Virginia as the second game. You can see they had 1.2 and 1.75 million in those time spots on True TV. That was down 2% in the early game and then up 1% in the later game. Wednesday's games. Grambling State and Montana State was 1.45, up 35 big percent, and Colorado Boise State up 1.78 million, which was 30% increase. That looks really great, especially when you compare it to what they did the week before. So the prior Tuesday, all they did was show a simulcast of the NBA game, which was on TNT. You can see that they did not reach 100,000 viewers on the early game and barely got a little over 100,000 viewers in the later game. On Wednesday, I think they did the same thing with NHL, but I could not see the viewership numbers for the actual games. So what I was able to gather were TNT Sports Tonight at just 50,000 viewers, and then the NHL Game Break, which I assume is between the first and second games, at 10 o'clock, that was 109,000 viewers. So again, I think that was the simulcast of 2 NHL games that night. It seems like True TV's not even trying to show anything, so it's really one bundle between TNT and True TV. But let's take a look at TBS and TNT for the same time. So first, let's talk about their general sports viewership. They show the NBA on Tuesdays and Thursdays on TNT, but they've decided not to run against the NCAA tournament games, including the first 4. That would be strange programming to have such an overlap of viewership going head to head. Then their NHL coverage is the entire season on Wednesdays, and then starting in February, they also have Sundays on TNT. Then we go to pro wrestling. All Elite Wrestling is shown Wednesday nights on TBS, and then they have a 1-hour show on Friday night, and then a 2-hour show on Saturday night on TNT. So lots of AEW wrestling to be shown, and now that a new CEO has made its way to AEW, I'm sure that TBS and TNT will be raking in the money more than they ever have before. So let's talk about what they did in the week before the tournament. On the 12th, TNT showed their 2 NBA games. The early game got 973,000 viewers, which was second in that time slot. And then the later game had 877,000 viewers, which was 4th in the time slot. Then on Wednesday night, TBS had AEW Dynamite, 801,000 viewers, which was 3rd highest. And then TNT, at the same time, overlapping, they had the early game, 246,000 NHL viewers, and then the late game, 178,000 viewers. So you can see then once they hit with the tournament, they did not show any new programming on the 19th, so nothing was listed for the TV ratings there. But on the 20th, they still ran their regular shows. Dynamite, about the same, 800,000. If you're a pro wrestling fan, I guess you just tune in no matter what. You got to see Mercedes on the 13th for Big Business, and you pretty much were tuning in again on the 20th. But for TNT, then we had hockey. I guess it was just better teams for the early game. So the Maple Leafs are having a good season, so I'm sure that was it. So 331,000 for the early games, and then in the late window, about the same, 179,000 viewers. So let's look at the first round and see how that compared. You can see the highest rated time slot for each of the 4 networks. Obviously, CBS as a broadcast network is going to have a much higher viewing ratership than the cable networks. So you can see CBS had 6.21 million for Oakland, Kentucky, and on Thursday night, and then CBS had James Madison in Wisconsin at 5.21 million on Friday night. Then the other 3 networks, you can see pretty much which games are the best at a certain time is where you're going to get the best viewership. True TV even managed to get higher than TBS on Thursday night just based on the game that was being played. On Thursday night, TNT had the highest rating with 2.51 million for Colorado State and Texas, but on Friday night, we had TBS with 2.91 million for Grambling State and Purdue. So what does that leave us with? On Thursday night, the average viewership was 8.5 million for Thursday, which was the most watched since 2015. And on Friday night, we had 8.6 million, which was the second most watched, just behind last year's total of 8.8 million. When we expand that to the rest of the weekend, Saturday had 10.8 million, which was the most watched in history, but Sunday, probably based on all chalk and not particularly close games, we had 8.91 million, down 8% from last year. Overall, however, for the entire week, 9.07 million, up from 9.05 last year. So what do we take from the viewership? Well, the best thing we can say is if you expand the tournament, what we're going to do is if we have a whole bundle of other teams, it's going to add another whole weekend to the tournament. If we just, however, add a few teams, we're probably going to play those games on Tuesday and Wednesday with the first four. So you can see True TV, they did pretty well for them, obviously, on Tuesday and Wednesday, but those games in general are going to be less than what you get on Thursday and Friday. So I think we can say that for the TV networks perspective, yes, they're going to gain a lot of viewers for those two nights on Tuesday and Wednesday, but is that worth it in the long run for them to open up the contract? No, because anytime you add more teams, those are in general less desirable teams because they're simply not as good teams. Sure, you could get Blue Bloods having bad years. They could get moved to Tuesday or Wednesday night. You get better viewership for an individual game, yes, but in general, look more to what you see on Tuesday and Wednesday nights. Those are the lowest rated games in general. So you're gonna look at those numbers for what you're going to get for any Tuesday night game, I think, or a Wednesday night game per se. So again, that takes us back to our original point. We will have the two networks, CBS and Warner Brothers Discovery. They're simply not going to just want to open up the contract to pay a whole bunch more money, up to an extra $1 billion per year, just to add a few extra games. That's just not going to make any dollars and cents for them. So with that said, I think point one is well spent there. I think we can move on to point two, which is simply going to be talking more about the NCAA. So the NCAA reported a record $1.29 billion in revenue in 2023, and more than 80% of that number comes from the men's March Madness, which of course is driven primarily through the two TV deals. That 1.29, when you break it down even further, you can see that the TV rights by themselves, which is not just a deal we're talking about, is $929 million plus another $16 million in sponsorships. That $929 million will include their other rights contract that is expiring with ESPN or any other rights they may have along the way. On top of that, we have ticket sales from its championships and postseason tournaments, which is a substantial $222 million. So if you do add games, that number right there is going to go up because you'll have more venues where you think from ticket sales they'll make more money. So of course the men's basketball tournament is an important piece to all three of those numbers that we just looked at there. So as we talked about, the CBS Turner deal paid the NCAA $873 million in 2023. That accounted for 94% of the TV rights. But fortunately for women's basketball and many other NCAA sports, the NCAA and ESPN reached a new 8-year, $920 million deal, averaging $115 million a year over the lifespan of the deal. It will begin at the beginning of the next school year in 2024, and it will air 40 championships, including women's basketball, and also includes the NIT, which we'll talk about in a little bit, going down in value. So, NCAA has just reached about $650.8 million of their $1.29 billion in revenue, ends up being distributed to the Division I members. And if we look at that in graph form, what we just looked at, you can see at the top, $945 million is the TV and marketing, which we had broken up previously into $929 on top of that. And then the $16 million in the sponsorships. Then you can see the $222 million for the championships, including the NIT. You can see there was a little bit of additional money for investment income and sales services, etc. To get you to, at the bottom, the $1.29 billion, you can see that number is creeping up over the years. It'll make a nice jump next year for the new contracts. So if we break down the $650.8 million that's distributed to the NCAA, for our purposes today, the top two lines are the most important: the Equal Conference Fund and the Basketball Performance Fund that get paid out in April of each year. You can see we have $54.8 million to the Equal Conference Fund and $171 million to the Basketball Performance Fund. Now, when you take a look at everything we just saw from the prior page into a circle graph, you can see that they included the percentages. The Basketball Performance Fund shows up at 26%, and the Equal Conference Fund shows up at 8% of the total $650.8 million. Now, the Division I Basketball Performance Fund, as well as the Division I Equal Conference Fund, broken up into what they call units each year. So for 2022-23 school year, you can see that's listed here, but we're going to focus on 2023-24. The Division I Basketball Performance Fund, a total $171.2 million, and the D1 Equal Conference Fund was at about $54.8 million for a total of $226 million. When you divide that into units, that's $1.712 million per unit. So let's talk about a unit. According to the distribution list we got directly from the NCAA online, 1 unit is awarded to each institution participating in each game in the NCAA tournament, except the first game played by automatic qualifiers and the championship game. Conferences are encouraged, but not required, to distribute the Basketball Performance Fund equally among all members' institutions. And yes, I guess it is fun instead of fund. So, oh well. A little spelling error there. Didn't hurt anyone. But the key difference I want to point out for later, a unit does not include the automatic qualifiers. So right now there are 32 automatic qualifiers. Next year there'll be 31. For our calculations later, that's important. Going by the letter of the law there, if you do not count units for the automatic qualifiers, right now we have exactly 100 units. So that will be key again going forward. Next year it'll jump up to 101 without the Pac-12. Let's also quickly talk about the Equal Conference Fund is distributed to active Division I basketball playing conferences that participate in the basketball tournament. Just wanted to hit that definition. Those are your automatic qualifiers. So here are the list of those 32 automatic qualifiers. Right there you can see the Pac-12. For all intents and purposes, not going to have a representative next year. The 2 remaining teams next year, Washington State and Oregon State, they're going to be playing with the West Coast Conference, the WCC. They'll be eligible for their automatic bid. So let's look at the current right here. We have 32 auto bids and 36 at-large bids for our 68 spots. So how do we get to 100 units? We have 68 games played. So you say there's 68 teams, how are there 67 games? Let's look at that backwards. 68 games. What we really want to talk about are losses. To get 1 winner, it takes 67 losses. So to have 68 teams, we then have 67 games played. So for each game, we're going to talk about 2 units per game. Each participating team is a unit. If we multiplied 67 games times 2, that would of course get us 134 units. But as we saw from the prior game, there are not units for the championship game. They've excluded that for some reason. I suppose if you've reached the championship game, you've gotten enough benefit for your school out of it. So those 2 units essentially are wiped away. So we get 132 units. And then like we talked about, we're going to subtract 32 auto bids. So that gets us to our 100 units. Then we quickly look at next year. Of course, Pac-12 gone, 101 units, but otherwise the calculation remains the same. So our revenue from the 2024 tournament will be $873 million, which is the last year under the old deal, which averaged $771 million per year over the 14 years. And so the maximum number this year, being the last year of the deal, is $873 million under the media rights deal. Next year, once it kicks in, we're getting a really nice jump, $122 million, right to $995 million in the very first of these years. So as we talked about earlier, we just estimated $1 billion in that whole calculation by Navigate. Worked out well. We're going to be very quickly over that $1 billion. So again, the average will be $1.1 billion, but the low number, $995 for next year. So let's just assume there are no other changes. We're going to pretend the new rights deal with ESPN doesn't count. So just for ease of calculations, there's no inflation. The exact number that the NCAA takes in from tickets doesn't change. So exactly nothing else changed. So if we look at this year's total, for next year, we have 50.6% of the revenue is distributed to Division I members. Then we have 26% of that revenue is distributed under the D1 Basketball Performance Fund, and the 8% is distributed under the D1 Eagle Conference Fund, which is what we saw in the circle graph earlier. So the revenue for the NCAA as a total increases by $122 million to $1.412 billion. So that gives us with about $714.5 million in revenue will be distributed to the Division I members. So that allows us to increase the D1 Basketball Performance Fund and the Equal Conference Fund to the numbers you see there. That combined revenue goes to $242.9 million, so a unit jumps from $1.712 million to a nice higher number to $1.840 million. And that's in year one. We know every year of the new 8-year deal, it's going to go up from there, assuming no changes to the number of teams goes into effect. So let's look at the NCAA Transformation Committee. Now, that was completed last year. It was led by the heel SEC Commissioner, Greg Sankey, who I think certainly cares more about getting more money for the SEC, similar to the Big Ten, as we're seeing all over in FBS football. But based on his committee's findings, their main takeaway for our purposes today was to suggest to increase the tournament from 68 teams to 90 teams. So when we talked about adding 22 games earlier today, that was fully from what the Transformation Committee recommended. So how they came to 90 games, they said all of the larger NCAA sports in Division I, if you have 200 or more schools participating in a given sport, then the postseason tournament should include 25% of the teams that participate in that sport. So here's a quick quote from Commissioner Sankey. He said, "In recent years, the environment surrounding collegiate athletics has evolved far faster than the structures, processes, and rules we use to govern it. Admittedly, that's true. College sports leaders know it's imperative that we transform the NCAA and modernize college sports, not just to keep pace with a changing landscape, but to shape and mold it better to serve student athletes' needs. While transformation is never complete and will shift to a new phase with the conclusion of this committee's work, the recommendations we put forward will immediately and meaningfully improve the mental and physical health of all Division I student athletes." Which, looking at the committee's findings, yes, they did include mental and physical health awareness. They included better insurance, among other things. But I think at the end of the day, their main takeaway, like we just said, was increasing the number of teams participating in the larger sports to 25%. So getting from 68 to 90 teams. Most at-large bids we know go to the big conferences. We know there will be 4 of them. He's commissioner of one of the 4. We know the SEC and the Big Ten want the most money from the FBS contracts that were just completed. So they want to take home the most money that would come from any increase there. So that's why I think he wants to expand to 90 teams. But let's take a look at the NCAA landscape in general right now. We have 24 NCAA sponsored championships. So the most recent year that we could find full data was for the 2021 school year. I'm sure the numbers have increased slightly since then, but we're not going to worry about that too much. So for 2021-22, there were 100,358 Division I male athletes and 88,352 female athletes, broken into 19 male sports, 21 female sports, and amongst those we have 3 that have co-ed championships: fencing, rifle, and skiing. So for our purposes today, we're going to talk about the sports that have brackets and the sports that do not have brackets. We're basically going to exclude the sports that do not have brackets. So first, here are our 17 sports, really 14 sports that do not have brackets. I put in a little asterisk by rifle, skiing, and fencing here. As we just said, they're co-ed sports, so really this drops the 17 to 14. Now, a couple of these sports do have brackets for individual performance, but we're not going to worry about individuals. Today, we're only focusing on team brackets. For example, wrestling has a whole bunch of wrestlers. They've got a nice big bracket that whittles down to one winner at each weight class. You get a whole bunch of individual champions, and the team champion is simply which individuals have fared the best throughout the brackets. So sports like that, where the team total has nothing to do with the individual brackets, we're just going to throw it out. But there's our sports that do not have brackets at all. Probably the most noteworthy being all the track and field, which we have in the nice visual there. So first, let's talk about the small sports. For our purposes here, as Commissioner Sankey noted, 200 teams and above we consider a large sport, and less than 200 teams we consider a small sport. We have what is NCS, National Collegiate Sports. In those sports, they have either just 1 or 2 championships. At the top you can see gymnastics. There's just one bracket, Division 1, 2, 3 teams all bundled into one group, the NCS group. And so any team that participates in gymnastics, they're under the NCS label. For other sports, right below it, NCS, you can see women's ice hockey. There are 65 teams. What we have there is a Division 1 bracket and then a Division 3 bracket. The Division 1 and Division 2 teams play in the NCS region, so that's why we have an NCS here. Now men's, even though it's men's ice hockey, set up the same way, 40 teams, there's a Division 3 bracket by themselves, but any teams from Division 1 and 2 participate in Division 1. It's the same as NCS, but for ice hockey, they just don't call it NCS. Otherwise, you can see our other sports here, several of NCS sports, but both women's and men's lacrosse and women's field hockey do not have NCS. They do have Division 1, 2, and 3 brackets. Women's lacrosse being the largest of all of these with 119 teams participating. Here are our large sports. You can see I have broken out football into FCS, the football championship subdivision, and FBS, the football bowl subdivision. So again, these are not quite up to date. We're using 2021-22 school years, so the numbers may have slightly increased. I do believe FBS will have 133 teams for this upcoming 2024 season, but for our purposes, we did not change that. So let's talk about each of these individually. Men and women's golf, you can see I have 2 numbers here. I've placed them at the top. If you include them as a bracket sport, they have 27.7% and 27.5% respectively participating in their Division 1 championships. So what they have are 30 teams going to a finals. Before that, there are regionals. So if you don't count the regionals, you start at just 30 team championships, then you only have 10.3% and 11.5% respectively participating. But the regionals really is where you start the championship. So I thought you should count that. And so I'm really going by the 27.5 and 7% here. This is a very large sport, 292 teams and 262 teams respectively. So the funny thing though is you don't get a bracket until you get to the final 8 teams. So like I said, you start with 30 teams advancing to the championship. You play some stroke golf for the first couple of rounds. Then you whittle 30 teams down to 15. They play one more round and knock that down to the top 8. Participate in head-to-head matchups in a bracket. So that's where we get our going down from 8 to 4 to 2. And then a championship in a bracket, single elimination to get your team champion. Tennis is particularly noteworthy as well. They have both a team bracket of 64 teams and then also an individual bracket of 64 teams at the Division 1 level. So you get a very large bracket. Again, we're only focusing on the team bracket. 27.5% of the 233 men's teams participate. You still get a 64 team bracket for the women, of course, but since there are more women's tennis teams, 300 in fact, it's only 21.3%. Baseball and softball, I'm sure you've heard of regionals and super regionals. You start with a 64 team bracket in the regionals, then you have a best of 3 series to get to the super regionals, which again, you will have 4 more teams participate in the super regionals. Then you get to the final 8 in your College World Series. We don't want to get into the weeds or specifics there, but 21.8% in each baseball and softball participating. The FBS, we have a 32 team bracket, I believe, with 123 teams. That gives us a 19.5% participation rate for FCS football. Now, they're included here even though they're under the 200 limit. We combine them with the FBS football. You can see way down at line 13, the total being 253 total football teams in Division 1 for 14.2% playoffs. Of course, you know The CFP has changed from a 4-team playoff to a 12-team playoff for 2024. So if we look at the 130 teams participating, it was a mere 3.1% that made it to the playoffs. For football, truly astounding. That increases to still by far the lowest at 9.2% this year. Just unbelievable how few teams get to advance to the playoffs in football. That will be a story for another day. But for today, we're going to focus on basketball, of course, 19.5 and 19.4% for women's and men's, respectively. And of course, at the bottom, below that, just below, women's volleyball, 332 teams, still a 64-team bracket. Women's soccer, 335 teams, 64-team bracket. Men's soccer, not quite as many. It's a 48-team bracket, but only 202 teams. So they're way at the top there for 23.8%. So at the end of the day, here are our percentages. If you exclude the average of the non-FBS football sports, it's a total of 22.35%. Now, since golf was a little funkier, if we remove it, it drops to 21.3%. Then let's say, since we're talking about basketball only today, let's look at all the other large sports. And with just the FBS removed, we're at 22.93%. When we remove FBS and golf, as well as basketball, we get to 21.76%. So I want to look at those numbers and how they compare just to the men's basketball. Of course, women's basketball, only a 2-team difference, basically the same. It was 19.5%. So for all intents and purposes, we're just looking at them both at the same time here. But for men's basketball, 350 teams, 19.4%. We had 4 teams, it jumps up to 20.6. 4 more, 21.7. You can see we jump up to 96 teams, 27.4. And if we add a whole nother round, 128 teams, 36.6%. So, keep those numbers in mind when we go forward here today. Let's switch topics now. Student athletes. That's our topic here. Student athletes. We want to look at more exposure for the student athletes here. First off, if they're playing in more games, these are the spotlight games of the season. Yes, regular season, you get so many viewers. The conference tournaments, you get a bigger number of viewers. But the NCAA tournament, you pretty much get the most viewers. So if you're a student athlete, this is your chance to gain more exposure, hopefully get more NIL deals going forward. And if you remember the hero of the first round, Jack Golke nailing 10 threes in Oakland's humongous win over Kentucky. Man, that guy killed my bracket. Whew! But he cashed in, he got at least 4 new NIL deals off of that one game alone, including Buffalo Wild Wings. Buffalo Wild Wings, on top of that, any game that would go to overtime, a player from the winning team of that overtime game, they would on the spot sign them to an NIL deal. So student athletes can cash in from the tournament expanding, extra games, more chances to cash in. But, if you're old school like me, you look back on your days when you get a little bit older and you say, man, I got to play in the NCAA basketball tournament. Whether you're out of one of those small leagues, just winning your conference tournament and finding a way into the tournament bracket, or, you were the 9th place team in the SEC, you didn't have a great year, maybe you transferred from a smaller school, this was your one shot at the NCAA tournament as a senior, you got in because there were more games. You get to look back, tell your kids, grandkids later, yes, I played in the NCAA tournament. That is good enough on its own for all student athletes to benefit from a larger tournament. Now, the fans. Let's talk about the fans. Whew! Yeah, you want to see your team in the tournament. It's that simple. You love your team. No matter what, you want them in the tournament. You're going to be mad if they're going to the NIT. Maybe you're maybe you went to Princeton, you were the number 1 seed, you thought you were going to go to the tournament this year, you lost in your conference tournament. Man, what a bitter ending to your year. So just as a fan in general, yes, you want to see your team play. If you like NCAA basketball or basketball in general, you get more chances to see more games if the tournament expands. You might have to search a little bit, try to find True TV, but more games to watch. It's better than anything else on a Tuesday or Wednesday night. Maybe you disagree, maybe you think the NBA is better, maybe AEW is better, maybe the NHL is better. I don't know, but it's another option. So, of course, If you're more than just a fan, if you're a traditional booster, giving some of your hard-earned money to the school for scholarship funds or for tickets, or if you're new in the NIL game, giving more to your NIL collective at your school, trying to lure in new student athletes, you want that bang for your buck. Yeah, you want that team to make the tournament. You want to know your hard-earned money didn't get lost. So yes, especially if you go to the NIL, you want your money to pay off. You want to see your guys or gals in the NCAA tournament. And of course, for our junkies out there, yeah, we have lots of online gaming. I think we're up to 38 states now that North Carolina has joined the fray. New in 2024, we get more chances to bet on more games. Yeah, we might not know the teams playing in these extra games as well, but we get the chance to bet on them if we so choose. So let's talk about some other considerations in general. If you have more tournament games, the regular season just doesn't matter as much. To me, I say poppycock. No. What are we talking about here, guys? The regular season. If you're a fan of a team or a conference, you're going to watch these games. You want to see your team get in. Yeah, the casual fans, they're not going to tune in anyways. You've got college football and you've got pro football up through January. Then you've got the NFL playoffs to the Super Bowl all the way through February. Maybe you're just tuning in February and March. By that point, you're caught up. You know which teams are kind of hanging around and going to be good. Maybe that's when you're going to tune in. Whether you're just fighting for seeding, whether you're fighting to get in, yeah, you're going to care about these games a little bit. But come on, guys. Regular season, what are we talking about here? The NBA, you've got 20 out of 30 teams making at least the play-in games. That's 2/3 of your league. And you've got an 82-game regular season. The NHL hasn't expanded. You've still got 16 out of 32, 50% making the playoffs in an 82-game regular season. The NFL got an additional wild card game in each conference. We've now got 14 out of 32 teams, or 43.8%. Teams making with just a mere 17-game regular season. And even the MLB has expanded to 16 in each league. 12 out of 30 teams making the playoffs. 40% out of a 162-game regular season. Men's basketball, 68 teams out of 350. Like we just talked about, 19.4%. Women's basketball, 19.5%. You've got a 31-game regular season. You've got 1 to 4 or 5, if you're NC State, for example, conference tournament games. That's 36 total games, and only 19.4 or 5% of the teams making the tournament. What are we talking about, guys? This is not the same ballpark. There is no dilution in these games. If you're getting to the end of the season, whether there's 68 or 96 or even 128, you've got reason to watch regular season. You've got reason to watch conference tournament games. It's great. Let's not worry about that. Move on to the next. So, if we talk about no one will watch these regular season games, we've got more teams projected to be in the field or on the bubble, so there will simply be more games that matter for both seeding and for making the tournament. Remember, games that matter. We're going to talk about that a million times along the way. Now, let's take a specific example here, the NBA play-in tournament, 18-19, they just had, 16 teams make the playoffs, 1.79 million. But then the world changed a little bit after that. We had the COVID seasons. We dropped all the way down to 1.36 million in 2021-22. Now, that was a shortened regular season. It was the first time we also implemented the play-in tournament as it now stands. During COVID in the bubble, there was a different sort of playoff, not to worry about here today. 2021 season, first one, 7 and 8 play each other, 9 and 10 play each other, 7 or 8 winner goes into the playoffs, 7-8 loser then plays the winner of the 9-10 game. The loser of the 9-10 game is out, and we go from there. We end up with 8 teams. You can see since then, it seems to have worked out a little bit. After that first year, the ratings back up 1.61 million and 1.59 million. So if nothing else, I'd say viewership changes due to COVID and due to streaming have provided a new normal for us, and if nothing else, simply minimal or no impact at all due to more teams making the NCAA tournament. And then as we talked about the conference tournament, will they be less meaningful? This year we saw 5 bid stealers, but in a normal year we get 1 or 2. So to me, I'd say just as often as you see a 4 or 5 seed, they may feel comfortable that they're going to make the NCAA tournament, but they still want to win their conference tournament. As a 7 and 8 seed, they may feel like their only chance is to make it with a run to the finals or to win their conference championship. Maybe that gets pushed a little bit back if you're a bigger conference and you think for sure you're going to have more bids. But that said, you just never know, or you don't want to leave it up to the selection committee. Essentially, I think though, when it comes down to it, everybody that's playing in their conference tournament, they really want to win. They're going to play equally as hard. The fans, they're going to watch. They want to see good basketball in these conference tournaments. I don't think one way or the other, you're going to get less quality basketball in these conference tournaments by having more teams make the tournament. On to the next. Let's talk about some other expansion considerations. A couple bullet points here: inclusivity and fairness. We want to allow a wider range of schools to compete on the national stage. Mostly we're going to talk about the larger schools here. Yeah, you want everybody to have their one chance in their 4 years to get to the playoffs, have a decent year in a bigger conference, or win your conference, or win a regular season, finish top 2 or 3 in the smaller conference. You get your shot at the NCAA tournament. Of course, we want to balance both tradition and change. Now, the beauty of our 64 to 68 team brackets, it just looks amazing. It fits perfectly under that one page of our bracket. It's pretty much set perfectly. But yeah, things are changing in the NCAA faster than we can imagine. Conference realignment, huge TV deals, particularly for football. They're running everything. We've got to be very cognizant of where that goes. Logistically, we need to account for scheduling, venue availability, the broadcast agreements, which we talked about extensively earlier, while maximizing its appeal to the fans and the stakeholders. So as for scheduling, we briefly touched on it. We need to add another whole weekend to the tournament. I don't know if anyone wants that going into the next weekend of April. I don't know if you want to shift the beginning or end of the season completely. Or do we just add games to Tuesday and Wednesday, what we have now? Are arenas even available on certain days? Right now we have Dayton holding all 4 games of the first 4. Do we need to expand that? Do we need to start playing home games at team sites? What else do we do with the broadcast arrangements? What are the windows for any additional games? Impact on smaller conference teams. You know, I have a feeling the SEC should say we need to include the 90 best overall teams. Maybe we don't need these automatic qualifiers. That would, of course, be horrendous for this particular tournament and really any tournament in the NCAA. We don't want to diminish their opportunities for these smaller conferences, but maybe we need to expand their opportunities. Maybe they are guaranteed at-large bids on top of their automatic qualifier. I have a good feeling that the large conferences are going to push back from that, but what do I know? Lastly, altering the charm and appeal. Part of what makes the NCAA tournament special are the underdog stories and its unpredictability. If you change this dynamic too much, how does this go? Or do underdogs become much less likely to win somehow? Do we just not care about these underdogs with a whole bunch of extra games being added on? I don't know. How does this work out? That's going to be hard to figure out. We need to try. So let's take a look, putting all of it together into some of these possibilities. First, let's look at a 128 team bracket. Man, all of these are going to onto 2 pages, but pretty much if you add another round, that's going to be too much to fit onto 1 page. Here you can see we've got a bracket, 128 teams. Now, printyourbrackets.com, they were great. Way to find all of these free advertising here for them. They deserve it. You can find up to 128 team brackets on their website very easily. Here, we didn't bother to change anything. You can see they're just seated 1 to 128. So here you have 4 regions of 32 teams instead of 4 regions of 16 teams plus the first 4. So again, 1 would play 32 in the first round, 2 would play 31, and so on and so forth. In the middle, you get 16 versus 17, 15 versus 18. And again, that just adds 1 additional game. If you do this, anytime you add an entire round, you're basically adding a whole tournament on top of it. So remember when we talked about a 68 team bracket has 67 games. Let's go back to a 64 team bracket. That's 63 games. You go to 128 team bracket, you're at 127 games. You've doubled your size of the entire tournament by adding an additional round. That's going to make things really complicated for scheduling. I think the first round by itself gets in its entire weekend. Are people tuning in for the first weekend when you're seeing 1 versus 32? Or you're seeing these less desirable matchups throughout the weekend? I don't know. I think that's probably just way too much for anyone to handle at this point. But along the same line, let's knock it down to 96 teams. This was talked about many years ago. There are actually pretty good number of advocates for this. It's pretty much the same as the 128 team bracket. It's right in the middle. Here we have the top 8 seeds in each bracket now get a bye. 9 through 16 seeds, 9 I guess through 24 seeds, have to play a game in the new first round. So again, basically we've got 95 games. We may be adding a whole additional weekend. If not, we're going to be playing a Tuesday and Wednesday that basically looks exactly the same. True March Madness, full schedules up and down for 2 full days. To me, this is, a little too much. Yet again, this even goes over the 25% suggested by Commissioner Sankey and the committee. Let's take a look at that. 90 games, this was the committee's recommendation. We're just simply adding a couple additional buys in the first round. 96 down to 90, that's 6 less teams. Not a whole lot changes here. That gets you just to the 25%. I don't see why we would do this number unless you are committed to 25% no matter what. Now, a much more realistic number, I think, when we get to 80 and then the 76, we're going to look at these. 80 teams, you can see each region has 4 pigtail games, as they're often called. So 4 additional games. So the first 4 now becomes the first 16. I don't know if anyone wants to call it that, but you can see here, you're going to probably get buys with the extra games for the 16 seeds and the 15 seeds. And then also the last automatic qualifiers, the bottom 16 teams there. And we'll just have to see how that plays out. This is realistic. We could do this, but let's take one other look at one other possibility that is slightly less, 76 team bracket. That's solely adding 8 additional at-large bids to what we have now, 68 teams. So here we're going to have the 16 seeds are all going to play an extra game, and then the bottom 8 at-large teams play the extra game as well. So there you have it. This is what your 76 game bracket will look like. What is my particular preference? For me, it is the 76 games that we looked at most recently. You've got 3 play-in games in each region, so that gets us to 76 teams, only an increase of 8 from where we're at today. So let's go step by step on how this is going to play out. Selection Sunday, everyone loves Selection Sunday. For that 1 hour when we get to see the reveal of the brackets, completely unchanged. It's going to fit in your 1 hour nice and easily. Some teams are going to be happy, some teams are going to be sad, but we're going to know who's playing on Selection Sunday. Then we're going to, I don't think calling it a first 12 is going to work. Generically, these are our play-in games. People don't like to call it the play-in games. My recommendation here, call it the 11s, the 12s, and the 16s. That's where we're going to set up shop. These games are going to be played on Tuesday and Wednesday, just like our current first 4. So the play-in games here, we again will have all the 16 seeds they're going to play. Now, if you think about it, right now the bottom 4 teams that make the tournament, they play the extra game in the first 4. Now we're going to have the bottom 8 teams that make the tournament. They're going to play in the extra game. So 2 teams are going to get a lower seed than what they would. So 2 15 seeds are now going to become 16 seeds, and so on through the 13 seeds. How I'm proposing to set this up, the lowest 20 of 22 automatic qualifiers among all conferences, but particularly the low majors, they must be inserted as the 13 through 16 seeds. And why we're going to break it down this way, in the last 5 years, I look back at all of the years, 20 conferences of the 32 conferences had exactly 1 bid in each of the last 5 NCAA tournaments. The Missouri Valley Conference and the Ohio Valley Conference had 1 each year, except for 1 year each where they both separately had 2 bids. Then the other 10 conferences all had at least 2 bids each year, except for the Atlantic 10, they had 1 year in which they only received 1 bid. The highest 11 automatic qualifiers, they're going to be in your 10 seeds. You see, we just talked about 10 conferences, plus the Missouri Valley and the Ohio Valley. You might think they're the next two, that would give us 12. Remember, the Pac-12 is ostensibly out for at least the next 2 years, so the highest 11 automatic qualifiers must be placed into the top 10. So that way, we're going to set the final 8 teams that are at-large selections from any conference. They will be placed into playoff games. They must be set as 11 seeds and 12 seeds. Now currently, as we briefly touched upon that, currently changes from year to year. This year there were so many bid stealers, they got added as 11 or 12 seeds. That pushed the first 4 play-in games to 10 seeds. We're going to take that out. Might change the S-curve as they call it, but we're not going to worry about that. We want ease of for everyone involved, for the fans, for setting up brackets. You don't have to worry from year to year that things are going to change. Every year, the 11s and the 12s, those are going to be your play-in games. So our first initial proposal here, we talked about possibly home venues. You could just add a whole weekend at one site. Say this year we had Pittsburgh, had the Oakland and Kentucky game. And so that was the biggest upset of the weekend, so I'm using them, plus I'm from there. So we want to talk about them. Right now they had the Thursday, Saturday. Do we then give them Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday games? I don't know. That might be too much. That might be too many teams coming in at once. Let's not quite do that. So let's see, instead if we have 3 additional Daytons. Dayton's worked out wonderfully every year since the play-in game was started, except for the COVID year, of course. Every game was in the state of Indiana, so Purdue and Indiana hosted those games. But let's see if we can find 3 other Daytons. I think we can do it. I think that will be the best. Every year, you kind of go closest to the location where the winner will play their next game after that. So, TV schedule, I think what we want to do here, each location will have 3 games in a row. Right now, they have 2 games, then they have a break, then they have 2 more games for an evening session, day session, evening session. What we're going to do here, we're just going to have 1 long session, 3 games each day. So we have, for example, 4:30, 7, and 9:30. We'll have 2 windows. These aren't going to be standalone games anymore, so we're going to stagger it. Maybe one site starts at 4:30, next site starts at 4:45 or 5, and we just play the 3 games in a row. We're guessing about 2.5 hours in between, but we know they generally start a half hour after the finish of the prior game. So that way we have mini madness with 2 games going on at once instead of 4 games going on at once like we get on Thursday or Friday. And then, of course, True TV, they, of course, will carry one of these games. TNT or TBS, they'll take the other game each night. How they want to divide that up, that's up to them. I assume that they will continue to want to air Dynamite on Wednesday nights, so maybe it'll be best to give TNT both Tuesday and Wednesday. That way AEW's free to have their normal spot on Wednesday. That said, not my problem. I'm not too worried about that particular point. So let's move to the bubble. This is basically our talk about watering down the tournament. The final bubble watch on ESPN on March 17th, they talked about the bid stealers. This year, Dayton losing removed a spot from the bubble because Duquesne stole that spot. In the American, FAU lost, so UAB gobbled up that spot. And then in the ACC, NC State played 5 games in 5 days and took that spot. In the Pac-12, in their final season, Oregon ran the gauntlet and they stole another spot. And you know, a lot of people thought, including ESPN, thought that New Mexico was going to be in anyways with their very high net rating. But in fact, when we came to the Selection Sunday, they said that New Mexico did indeed steal the 5th bubble spot. So, looking at that bubble watch, 37 locks. The bubble then consisted of 16 teams for 6 available spots. They considered 2 should be in, and then work to do were 14 teams. So if we just think about that, adding 8 more teams, that still doesn't cover everyone here that's listed in our bubble watch. I highlighted in green the teams that did eventually make it in out of that list. So we're going to go to bracketology for ESPN. I don't want to linger on them too much because Joe Lunardi is apparently the 118th best bracketologist in the land this year. But Despite that, he still only missed one team. Oklahoma didn't make it, Virginia did. You can see his first 4 out, next 4 out. I think if you put those 8 teams right there in, you're not going to be in bad shape. And then we look at CBS's. They revealed the actual last 4 in and the actual first 4 out. It changed a little bit and put Pitt into that group and took out St. John's, but not much of a surprise there. So if we expand our bubble even more, a whole bunch of teams, 17 in fact, they declined the NIT this year. I don't blame them. They played a long season. They thought they should get in. Well, I don't think all of them thought that. You can see there's some pretty high nets involved here. But a bunch of these teams thought they deserved to be in, and the NIT just wasn't going to be worth it for them. They wanted to look forward to next year, start thinking about the transfer portal, which inexplicably opened right after the selection show. So here's our full list of 17 teams. The number I put that beside there is the net, the NCAA evaluation tool, which is definitely a primary tool that everyone talks about and rightfully complains about. I wanted to put that in there so everyone could see where that was. Then for those teams that accepted the NIT, here's the bracket with their net. Seton Hall, Indiana State, Villanova, Wake Forest, those are your 1 seeds, and then down to the 4 seeds. They don't seed the teams that are lower than that, so I did not include them here. I have simply highlighted the teams that I thought would make it, the criteria I used, the teams that actually made it. They fell into my first 4 spots for the 11 seeds. And then the actual first 4 out, as revealed in the selection show, they got the second 4, 11 seeds. Then I looked and compared the NIT bracket with the teams that declined the NIT. If you got a 1 seed in the NIT, I put you in here, and otherwise it was just the next 4 teams in the net that declined the NIT. As that worked out, it gave us the 12 seeds of Villanova, Wake Forest, St. John's, Cincinnati, Utah, Ohio State, Princeton, and Bradley. Do I think the committee would actually put in both Princeton and Bradley? No, I do not think that. I think they would go probably to Iowa next. I do think Virginia Tech would be a possibility, but who knows? They love the Big 12 even more. They might put Maryland in there. They could put one of those SEC teams in there. I don't know. Regardless, you can see the list, but for my purposes, I thought this was great. This got 2 teams outside of the power conferences into the tournament, and even if there were just 1, that would be a pretty great result as well. I don't think anyone should really complain either way. So look at our bubble. I think we have a new bubble here. Here's my first 4 out. Providence, Virginia Tech, UCF, Iowa. Next 4 out, Butler, Washington, Memphis, Maryland. Again, those are solely based on net. I didn't bother to do an eye test or any other garbage non-conference strength of schedule evaluation, and I just went with the net. First teams that made it. I don't know, friends. That looks like a pretty good bubble to me. I'm not too worried about it. I think there's still a lot of debate to be had that'll keep everyone going and really excited for NCAA basketball. So, why this proposal? Quick rundown, a lot of it we've already talked about. 8 more at-large bids still provide for that strong bubble that we just looked about. No change to any of the 1-bid leagues. We don't want to remove any automatic qualifiers, and we're going to talk more about units here in a minute. We don't really want to change the TV schedule. Only adding 8 games really reduces that. We don't have crazy full March Madness on Tuesday and Wednesday. I don't think the fans really want that. Maybe they're going to be burnt out by Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday if we have 2 additional full March Madness days with 16 games each day, 4 games at a time. I don't think we really need that. Like I said, I think we have 3 games back to back to back, just 2 games at a time, the slow build into it. But the division of revenue virtually unchanged. So we want to go into our D1 Equal Conference Fund, remains the same, which is critical for the 1-bid leagues. The D1 Basketball Performance Fund, we are going to change that slightly, but I think it'll benefit anyone. So the 2 at-large first 4 games currently have teams that receive 1 unit. Remember, we talk about 1 unit every game, not counting automatic qualifiers, until the championship game. Every game has 2 units to them. Each team gets 1 unit. And what we're going to do, however, we're going to cut that in half. The 11s And the 12s, they're now only going to be worth a half unit each. Now, what does this do? We now have 8 extra teams. So this will increase the units from 101 beginning next year to 109. 8 extra games, 8 extra units, not 16 extra units. So from earlier, right now, 1 unit is worth $1.712 million. Under the new contract starting in 24-25. All things else equal, we now go to $1.84 million per unit. Going to 109 units plus the 31 auto bids, that changes our payout per unit down to $1.735 million each. I think this is still important. We look at the number from this year, $1.712 million. It's still an increase to $1.735 million. So the 22 one-bid leagues are guaranteed to gain 2 units with 4 16-seed games, bringing them to 4 guaranteed units plus their 22 auto bid paid out from the Equal Conference Fund. So then we get their 26 guaranteed payouts. That gives them now at least $45.2 million. Now for the 11 and 12s, each game participant, like we said, we're giving them only half unit. If we gave them a full unit each, there would be 117 units, valued at only $1.641 million each. The one-bid leagues, they would be losing money from this year. A great deal of the conference's budget and schools' budgets, they're going from this guaranteed money. We just can't have them lose money at the beginning of a new contract that pays out substantially higher. That's why we're going down to a half unit for these 11s and 12s games. And most importantly, we can't have this man right here missing the NCAA tournament. Right, Blake? We just can't have it. This man nailed over 100 threes. He took down Duke and stared down their fans at Cameron Indoor, and he should have been in this tournament. So Pitt should have been in with this new expanded bubble. We're getting 8 more teams in. We love it. College basketball, even better. 76 teams. That's what we're looking at. And there you have it, folks. Thank you. And there we are in the Sports Zoo. Until next time, farewell. Final 4. Let's do this. Where are we at? We've got Auburn and we've got UNC. Man, okay. Just has to be UNC. And Kentucky Creighton. Yeah, I just don't see Kentucky losing. They just have way too much talent. Kentucky going to the finals. And then the championship. Again, this has been a year where ACC just unfairly maligned. I just got to go with UNC. I saw what they did against Pitt there in the conference tournament. That's enough for me. Pitt should have been in. I'm giving it to UNC. All right, Tar Heels, national champs. Let's go.